Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to truly understanding the complex forces shaping our world. Have you ever felt like the daily headlines, involving trade policies, economic anxieties, even the dramatic stories of global tycoons feel like they're all happening in isolated silos?
Yeah, like completely separate stories.
Exactly. But the truth, as we're about to discover, is far more interconnected and frankly surprising than it often appears. These seemingly distinct narratives are actually threads in an incredibly intricate tapestry.
Hmm.
They reveal these profound shifts in the global economic and geopolitical landscape that directly affect us all. I mean, from the prices you see at the grocery store to the stability of international relations.
How does trickle, yeah.
It does. So today, we're embarking on a strategic analysis of these current global economic dynamics. We've tailored this for you, our listener, to help you understand the why behind the headlines and what these powerful forces truly mean for your world.
That's precisely our mission for this deep dive. We're going to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge and some truly surprising insights from a stack of really powerful sources we've been looking at.
Okay, what have we got?
So our core materials today include India, tariffs, and the multipolar world, a strategic analysis, stagflation or resilience, America's mid-2025 economic gamble, and also the Gautam Adani saga, from diamond sorter to global tycoon amid storms of controversy.
Quite a mix.
It is, and these documents offer unique but interconnected lenses through which we can view U.S. domestic policy, India's rapidly evolving role on the world stage, and yeah, a really high-stakes corporate drama that perfectly mirrors these broader global shifts.
This is about connecting those dots.
Exactly, giving you a clearer, more insightful picture of what's actually happening beneath the surface.
All right, let's start with a term that's, well, recently shaken off the dust of history books and is now, unsettlingly, a central player in real-world economic forecasts.
Stagflation. It's striking how quickly stagflation has re-entered serious conversations, isn't it? I mean, for decades, it was largely considered this painful relic of the 1970s.
Something you studied, not something you expected to live through again.
Right. A unique economic malaise that most economists, frankly, believe the U.S. had evolved beyond. To define it simply, stagflation is a grim economic condition marked by a truly awful triple threat: high inflation, stagnant economic growth, and rising unemployment, all happening simultaneously.
The worst of all worlds.
Pretty much. It specifically emerged from a perfect storm back in the 70s, driven by OPEC's sudden oil embargoes, which essentially throttled global energy supply and the eventual collapse of the Bretton Woods system.
Ah, Bretton Woods, that post-WWII agreement, right? Pegged currencies to the dollar.
Exactly. It provided a degree of stability but limited flexibility. Its collapse, alongside the oil shocks, created chaos. The fact that this term, stagflation, is back in vogue isn't just academic. It signals profound underlying concerns about our current economic health.
And for good reason, too. The 1970s were genuinely painful for the average American consumer. We're talking about long lines at gas stations stretching for blocks.
Oh, yeah, I remember hearing stories.
The shock of double-digit inflation figures just eating away at purchasing power year after year, and this pervasive sense of economic stagnation. People felt like they were running in place or even falling backward, just trying to maintain their standard of living.
Miserable.
Imagine watching your hard-earned savings buy less and less each year while job opportunities felt scarce. It was a miserable, disheartening time. The idea of that returning understandably evokes profound concern, especially since, as you said, policymakers and economists had truly believed it was a historical anomaly. They thought the tools and understanding of monetary policy had evolved so much.
That's a crucial point. But its unsettling resurgence in mid-2025 carries profound stakes. This isn't merely an academic debate anymore. It's directly shaping critical decisions at the Federal Reserve.
Right.
It's guiding business investment strategies across almost every industry, influencing electoral outcomes in a major way, and potentially impacting America's credibility and influence on the world stage. Fundamentally, this debate questions whether the U.S. is heading for a painful 1970s-style stagnation trap, or if it possesses some unique resilience, perhaps driven by technological advancements. That's the hope for some that will allow it to navigate these challenges. So, the natural next question is, what specific major policy decisions are economists pointing to as potentially reawakening this ghost from the past?
Okay, this is where the rubber truly meets the road. Our sources highlight two seismic policy moves in 2025 that are creating these dual pressures on both supply chains and the labor market. First, let's talk about what's being called the Liberation Day tariff shock.
Right, April 2025.
Yes, the Trump administration announced this broad package of import duties ranging from 10% to 25% on key categories of goods from major trading partners. And this wasn't just targeting, say, China.
No, it was wide-ranging.
Exactly. The European Union, Mexico, even traditionally close allies like Canada got hit. We're talking about vital sectors like steel, semiconductors, consumer electronics, autos.
The core stuff.
Right. And crucially for our deep dive today, there was a specific across-the-board 25% U.S. tariff imposed on Indian exports. Plus, you saw agricultural tariffs specifically levied in retaliation for perceived EU protections. It was a big move.
These tariffs, from an economic standpoint, function as what's known as a negative supply shock within the U.S. economy. In simpler terms, they effectively choke off the supply of goods by making imported components and finished products far more expensive right at the border.
Okay, so walk us through that.
Well, think about an American manufacturer who relies on imported steel or maybe semiconductors for their products. Now, their raw material costs jump by 10% or even 25% overnight. What happens then?
They have to pass it on, right?
More often than not, yes. These higher operational costs get passed directly on to you, the consumer, through higher prices for everything from cars to dishwashers. That pushes overall inflation upward.
And that's different from demand-driven inflation.
Critically different. Unlike demand-side inflation, which central banks can often cool by raising interest rates to curb consumer spending, supply-side inflation, like the kind caused by tariffs, is notoriously harder for central banks to tame using their usual tools.
Without triggering a recession.
Without inadvertently triggering a recession, exactly. It's a policy designed to make things more expensive, and, well, it does.
And it's not just a domestic issue, is it? The broader global domino effect is that tariffs inherently invite retaliatory tariffs from affected trade partners.
Always happens.
That 25% tariff on Indian exports, for instance, directly impacts vital sectors there. Textiles, pharmaceuticals, IT-enabled services. U.S. importers of these goods either have to absorb those increased costs, squeezing their already often razor-thin margins,
which many can't afford to do for long,
or they pass them on to you, the consumer. This also makes American exports less competitive globally because other countries retaliate, making U.S. goods more expensive abroad. It risks creating a more fragmented, less efficient global trade environment.
Reminiscent of the costly trade wars of the 1930s, potentially.
Yeah, it's a dangerous path.
That paints a very difficult picture. And tariffs are only half of this policy shock equation we're seeing. Simultaneously, the U.S. has seen significant large-scale deportations that have effectively reduced the American workforce.
And the numbers are pretty staggering.
They are. Our sources estimate a loss of approximately 1 to 2 million workers annually. These impacts are particularly acute, very noticeable in sectors that have historically relied heavily on migrant labor. Think agriculture, construction, hospitality, logistics.
And you can see the real-world effects. Imagine entire fields of crops going unpicked because there just aren't enough hands.
Or construction projects stalling.
Exactly. Critical construction projects stalling halfway through completion due to labor shortages.
Yeah.
These are actual examples cited in the sources, making this abstract concept of a labor supply shock immediately concrete and, frankly, quite impactful for everyday life.
So these key sectors are now facing acute shortages of workers. This naturally leads to rising wages as employers desperately scramble to fill open roles, which, sounds good on the surface.
High wages, yeah.
But despite these wage increases, overall output across these crucial industries is actually falling.
So you've got higher costs for businesses, higher wages for some workers, but critically less stuff being produced overall.
Exactly. This policy effectively constricts both the supply of goods and the supply of labor simultaneously. It creates this uncomfortable inflationary pressure even as overall economic growth begins to slow down. It's a direct, almost textbook contributor to that stagflationary scenario we're discussing.
So these aren't just theoretical pressures from policy decisions. The natural next question is, what is the cold, hard economic data actually telling us about this stagflationary drift by mid-2025?
Yeah, let's look at the numbers. By the summer of 2025, the warning signs were flashing pretty clearly across the board. GDP growth forecasts fell significantly.
How much?
Dropping from 2.4% in 2024 to an estimated 1.5% in 2025. That's a pretty substantial downward revision, indicating a clear slowdown.
Okay, and inflation.
Meanwhile, inflation remains stubbornly sticky at 4%, just sort of resisting the Federal Reserve's ongoing tightening measures.
Still double the Fed's target.
Right. The jobs market, which had been remarkably robust for a while, showed undeniable signs of softening with slower payroll growth. The ISM Services Index, which is a key barometer of business health, reported a notable spike in prices paid by businesses again, a direct indicator of rising input costs.
More inflationary pressure.
Yep. To add to the pressure, the US dollar also showed signs of weakening against major currencies, which further exacerbated import costs for American businesses. And perhaps most tellingly, corporate earnings warnings started coming out from firms in retail and manufacturing, specifically citing tariffs as a significant drag on their profit margins.
Okay, so all the pieces are fitting together.
What's particularly insightful here is how all these individual data points, when you stitch them together, paint a cohesive and frankly worrying picture. They collectively align precisely with the textbook profile of stagflation, that dangerous combination of slowing economic growth, persistently rising prices, and significant labor market disruptions.
Each bad on its own, worse together.
Exactly. Each indicator is a cause for concern on its own, but their simultaneous appearance makes the stagflation threat particularly salient. For example, that 4% inflation rate, coupled with the projected 1.5% GDP growth, is far from what a healthy, thriving economy looks like. It tells us that the economy isn't simply slowing down, it's struggling with rising costs while output diminishes.
Like running through quicksand, as you said.
Right. Creating a deeply uncomfortable and challenging environment for businesses and consumers alike.
So this begs the question, are these challenges we face unprecedented, or can history offer us either a roadmap to escape, or perhaps more sobering, a cautionary tale of what not to do?
That's a crucial query, and our sources draw compelling parallels to past economic struggles. The most obvious, of course, is the 1970s.
Right.
As you mentioned, the oil shocks of that decade led to widespread economic suffering in the U.S. Long gas lines, double-digit inflation that felt like a constant tax on everyone's earnings, the Federal Reserve, under the resolute leadership of Paul Volcker back then.
The Volcker shock.
Exactly. He eventually crushed inflation through what were described as punishingly high interest rates, but this came at the severe cost of a deep recession and widespread job losses. It was a bitter, painful pill to swallow, taking years to recover.
And Japan.
Additionally, some analysts point to Japan's lost decades, spanning the 1990s right through to the 2010s, as another cautionary tale. There, a unique combination of demographic decline, a massive financial overhang from a burst asset bubble, and, frankly, some policy missteps led to a prolonged cycle of economic stagnation, though of a different variety.
And that's a key distinction, isn't it? The sources highlight that while Japan experienced a deflationary stagnation, meaning falling prices, a deflationary spiral.
Right, prices going down, but no growth.
The U.S. today faces an inflationary version. It's described in one source as Japan with rising prices instead of falling ones.
That comparison and contrast is important because it underscores the sobering lesson from both historical examples. The immense difficulty and the painful duration involved in escaping these low-growth economic traps, regardless of whether they are inflationary or deflationary, once they firmly set in.
Hard to get out of that rut.
Very hard. Once an economy gets stuck in that kind of rut, pulling it out requires incredibly difficult choices and often comes with significant societal costs.
Okay, so this naturally leads us to the mainstream consensus versus the dissenting perspectives on the stagflation risk. What are the different camps saying?
It's a fascinating debate. A wide array of prominent economists and institutions have unequivocally sounded the alarm. Paul Krugman, for example, argues that Trump's tariffs are nothing short of a self-inflicted wound, likening them directly to a 1970s-style stagflationary trap the U.S. is walking into.
Strong words.
Very. Torsten Slok of Apollo Global emphasizes how the combined effects of tariffs, mass deportations, and a weakening dollar simultaneously boost prices and weigh on growth, creating that perfect storm. Mohammed El-Arian of Alliance, a highly respected voice, warns that tariffs carry a significant risk of stagflation.
He's usually pretty measured.
He is. And Justin Wolfers of the University of Michigan bluntly calls current policy stagflationary by design. Major economic forecasting firms like EY and Pantheon Macroeconomics reinforce this grim outlook. They're forecasting a substantial reduction in GDP, specifically 1% to 1.4% for 2025-26, and an increase in inflation by a full percentage point directly attributable to these policies.
Wow.
Even Bank of America economists expect no Fed rate cuts in 2025, directly citing sticky inflation stemming from deportations and tariffs as the primary reason.
That's a pretty broad and ideologically diverse spectrum sounding the alarm. even from normally cautious institutions. But of course, not everyone agrees. It's important to hear the counterarguments.
Absolutely. Some economists believe the stagflation narrative is overstated, or at least that the U.S. has unique strengths to combat it.
Like who?
Well, Nouriel Roubini of Project Syndicate, for instance, argues that a powerful AI-driven productivity boom could potentially propel growth above 3%, effectively offsetting these policy shocks and fundamentally changing the game.
Technology effects?
Right. Moody's Analytics, for its part, sees only modest stagflation but not a full-blown crisis. They describe a scenario of slower growth without an outright recession, a softer landing, if you will. Oxford Economics predicts GDP growth around 2% in 2025, suggesting maybe the deportation effects are overstated if native hiring and automation step in to fill the labor gaps.
Interesting nuance there.
And even Bank of America, in alternate reports, indicates that technology investment and reshoring efforts could help the U.S. avoid the worst-case scenarios. And notably, you have pro-Trump economists like Stephen Moore and Arthur Laffer arguing the opposite, that tariffs actually accelerate reshoring, protect American jobs, and ultimately create long-term competitiveness.
The short-term pain, long-term gain argument.
Exactly, framing the current situation that way.
Okay, so zooming out, what this highlights is how each side meticulously builds its case, using different assumptions, different economic models that guide their predictions. It really gives you, the listener, a balanced view to weigh these different perspectives.
It does. And this contentious, uncertain economic outlook in the U.S. naturally places the Federal Reserve in an incredibly difficult, almost unenviable position.
That's absolutely true. The Federal Reserve finds itself caught in that classic economic trap, famously likened to navigating between Scylla and Charybdis, two equally dangerous choices.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Pretty much. If it raises interest rates further to combat the tariff-driven inflation and the wage pressures from labor shortages, it risks deepening the economic stagnation already at play, potentially triggering a recession.
Killing growth.
Conversely, if it cuts rates to support economic growth and employment, it risks fueling inflation even more aggressively, potentially sending it spiraling higher. It's a genuine lose-lose situation with no easy answers.
So what's Powell doing?
Well, Fed Chair Jerome Powell has, so far, maintained a remarkably cautious stance, signaling quite clearly that interest rate cuts are unlikely in 2025. Internal debates within the Fed itself reflect this deep uncertainty. Some are arguing the central bank should maybe accept higher inflation, perhaps 3% or even 4%, to preserve economic growth and avoid a recession.
Tolerate more inflation.
While others firmly warn that its long-term credibility in fighting inflation is paramount, and any wavering would have disastrous consequences down the line.
What's particularly challenging for a central bank in this dilemma is the perception factor. If the public and markets perceive the Fed as wavering between priorities, trying to fight inflation one day and boost growth the next, or just appearing indecisive, it can lead to a significant loss of central bank credibility.
And that matters hugely.
It has long-lasting negative effects on market expectations and overall economic stability. We saw this tragically in the 1970s. Once markets lose faith in the central bank's steadfast commitment to stable prices, inflationary expectations become ingrained in consumer and business behavior. That makes the battle to tame rising costs even harder and more painful.
And the implications don't stop at the U.S. border, do they? The stagflation debate and these tariff policies are creating global ripple effects.
Big time. Tariffs have predictably triggered widespread retaliation from major trading partners. This is leading to a fragmented global trade environment that, as we mentioned, bears an unsettling resemblance to the protectionist era of the 1930s Smoot-Hawley Act, which famously exacerbated the Great Depression.
So allies are hitting back.
Oh yeah. Allies like Canada and the EU have imposed their own counter tariffs on American goods, hurting U.S. exporters. Meanwhile, China has strategically shifted its exports toward emerging markets like those in Southeast Asia and Africa, trying to bypass these restrictions.
Finding new routes.
Exactly. And perhaps ominously, global investors are actively reevaluating the dollar's role as the world's reserve currency.
That's a big one.
It is. If confidence in the dollar, which has been the bedrock of global finance for decades, erodes, capital flight from the U.S. could accelerate. That would further weaken the currency and stoke inflationary pressures both within the U.S. and globally, potentially reshaping the very architecture of international finance.
Zooming out, this points to profound implications for global economic stability, the future of international trade relations, and the potential erosion of the dollar's long-held dominance. It signals a potential shift in global economic power dynamics that could play out over decades.
It really could. But amidst this rather gloomy economic forecast and the intricate global chess game, there's one significant factor that some believe could fundamentally alter the entire trajectory.
And that's the technology wildcard, right?
Yeah,
Specifically, artificial intelligence and its productivity potential.
exactly. One key potential lifeline and a cornerstone of the optimist argument is the truly transformative role of technology. The U.S. undeniably maintains its global leadership in artificial intelligence, AI, and digital infrastructure.
No question there.
And many analysts firmly believe that a significant productivity boom driven by AI is not just coming, but is currently underway, quietly building beneath the surface of the economic data.
So the critical question becomes, to what extent can truly groundbreaking technological advancements override these significant macroeconomic policy shocks and severe labor supply constraints?
That's the billion-dollar question. The argument is compelling. If AI-driven efficiencies can effectively boost labor productivity by, say, 2–3% annually through automating routine tasks, optimizing supply chains, accelerating scientific R&D, enhancing decision-making.
All the things AI promises.
Right. This could potentially offset a substantial portion of the economic drag caused by both the tariffs and the mass deportations. This forms the heart of the optimist case, positing that America's unique technological dynamism might actually prevent a replay of the 1970s malaise, precisely because the U.S. today sits atop the commanding heights of the digital economy.
It's America's high-stakes experiment. Can innovation outrun policy missteps?
That's a great way to put it. Its outcome will have profound implications not just for the U.S., but for the entire global economy, determining whether we face a prolonged struggle or find a unique path to resilience.
Okay. This complex and uncertain economic reality in the U.S. doesn't exist in a vacuum, though. It deeply intertwines with the strategic decisions and evolving roles of other major global players, particularly the rising power of India. Let's pivot now to India's strategic navigation in a multipolar world amidst these intensifying trade tensions.
Yeah, it's fascinating to consider India's long history of navigating complex global dynamics. During the Cold War, the global order was rigidly defined by a stark bipolarity, essentially forcing nations to choose between the U.S.-led capitalist bloc and the Soviet Union-led socialist bloc.
Choose a side.
Right. India famously pioneered the non-aligned movement, NAM, a bold attempt to chart an independent path, but for practical security reasons and, importantly, to counterbalance China's growing influence, it often tilted toward the Soviet Union historically.
Pragmatism.
Exactly. With the collapse of the USSR in 1991, the world briefly appeared unipolar, dominated almost solely by the United States. But as our sources emphatically state, 3 decades later, that unipolar moment has definitively ended.
So what does this mean for India's strategy today? How do they operate now?
Well, the sources make it abundantly clear that the current global system is profoundly multipolar. In this new reality, while the U.S. still wields enormous influence, other powers, China, India, Russia, Japan, Germany, France, Britain, Indonesia, Brazil, they all command significant economic and political weight.
Lots of players on the board.
Lots of players. This means India's strategic approach cannot be framed as choosing camps. It's a far more intricate and agile dance. India is continuously navigating and managing shifting alliances.
Like how?
Cooperating extensively with the U.S. in areas like defense and cutting-edge technology, while simultaneously engaging Russia in critical sectors such as energy despite Western pressures, actively managing competition and occasional friction with China, and at the same time deepening ties with various other emerging global powers through new trade deals and diplomatic initiatives.
So juggling multiple relationships.
It's a sophisticated approach reflecting a dynamic and pragmatic global diplomacy, prioritizing national interest above rigid ideological alignment.
And this strategic flexibility, this complex navigation, is now being directly tested by the latest round of trade tensions with the United States. We're talking about that significant 25% across-the-board U.S. tariff on Indian exports that the U.S. imposed.
That's the trigger point.
What's truly insightful here, though, is the source's central argument that this specific trade tension is actually less about grand geopolitics and more about domestic lobbying within the U.S. This is a common misconception about trade wars, isn't it?
It often is, yeah. People assume it's all high-level strategy.
Let's elaborate on that lobbying angle. The American agricultural sector, for example, is depicted as one of the most heavily subsidized industries in the world. U.S. farm subsidies apparently top a staggering $30 billion annually in recent years.
$30 billion, wow.
This massive subsidy regime significantly distorts global markets. American farmers is further shielded by extensive price supports, crop insurance programs, export guarantees, collectively creating a profoundly uneven playing field for Indian exporters trying to compete fairly.
So Indian farmers aren't just competing with U.S. farmers, they're competing with the U.S. Treasury.
In effect, yes, they're effectively up against the U.S. Treasury, not just other farmers.
This raises an important question, though. Why does this play out as tariffs against India specifically? While Donald Trump's public rhetoric often suggests toughness on trade partners and a hardline stance aimed at protecting American jobs.
Which plays well politically sometimes.
Right. But the real pressure for these specific tariffs, as the source argues, originates from powerful, entrenched lobbies operating on Capitol Hill in Washington. The source claims this particular tariff isn't really an expression of personal dislike for Indian farmers or India itself. Rather, it's the U.S. corporate ag lobby flexing its muscle on Capitol Hill, demonstrating its considerable political influence in shaping trade policy to protect its own interests, even if it ultimately means raising costs for American consumers.
So, if it's really about lobbying, what does India do about this? The sources suggest India has strategic options, maybe drawing inspiration from a surprising playbook.
Which one?
Well, just as Israel has famously mastered the art of lobbying in Washington, especially in mobilizing bipartisan congressional support for its interests, India can apparently learn from this. It can leverage its own powerful sectors. Think big pharma, big tech.
Where India has significant players.
Exactly. Along with the significant influence of its diaspora. There are over 4 million Indian Americans, described as a wealthy and politically active community with considerable capacity to shape narratives and push back against protectionist policies in Washington.
So it's about playing the inside game in D.C.
Precisely. This isn't just about economic policy. It's about playing the political game in D.C. as effectively as other nations do.
Indeed. Okay, beyond the political motives and lobbying efforts, we need to examine the stark economic realities of these tariffs. Who truly bears the cost in the long run? The common wisdom about tariffs is often that they hurt foreign producers.
But here's the unexpected reality for you, the consumer.
Yeah.
You're actually the one paying the tax.
That's the surprising truth most people miss, isn't it?
It really is. The fundamental economic consensus across the board is that tariffs are, in effect, taxes paid by importers, not foreign exporters. When U.S. importers get hit with these tariffs, they face two primary choices.
Absorb or pass on.
Right. They can either absorb the tariffs themselves, which significantly reduces their profit margins, or they can pass these additional costs directly onto you, the consumer, through higher prices. Given that U.S. retail margins are frequently razor-thin across many sectors.
The latter is much more likely.
Exactly. The immediate and direct result is higher consumer prices for everything from clothes to medicines felt directly in your wallet.
What's particularly striking here is why the situation is described as politically explosive. While tariffs are often publicly framed by politicians as necessary protectionism for domestic farmers or industries.
Saving jobs, etc.
Right. In practical economic terms, the source argues they directly increase inflation in consumer goods, which impacts the everyday budgets of households, making essential items more expensive. They also strain U.S. businesses that are deeply dependent on complex global supply chains for their inputs and operations, forcing them to find more expensive domestic alternatives or just raise prices.
And the retaliation piece.
And crucially, they trigger retaliation from trade partners, which then hurts American exporters by making their goods more expensive abroad, creating that detrimental cycle of shrinking markets for U.S. products. It's a self-defeating spiral that ultimately hurts domestic competitiveness.
The sources observed that the shelf life of such tariff wars is usually short, maybe 1 to 2 years.
Interesting. Why so short?
Well, it suggests that by the 2026 midterm elections, for example, rising consumer anger over these higher costs could very well become a decisive electoral issue, potentially forcing a policy reversal as politicians face voter backlash.
Ah, the political cycle kicks in.
Exactly. And this directly connects back to our earlier discussion on stagflation, explicitly noting how tariffs act as a key supply shock, directly contributing to those inflationary pressures the U.S. is currently facing. So, with this context, how is India specifically positioned to navigate this newly erected tariff wall? What does this mean for its own economic future and global strategy?
Well, for now, India must actively navigate a significant 25% tariff wall on its exports to the U.S. To put this in comparative context, this is substantial, though China, as we noted, faces even higher tariffs, estimated around 35% on average. Other countries that managed to cut quick deals with the U.S. are still apparently stuck in the 20% range.
So India's in a tough spot, but maybe not the worst.
Relatively speaking, perhaps. But this creates an inherent paradox for India, presenting both short-term pain and potential long-term strategic opportunities.
That's the fascinating short-term pain, long-term gain dynamic we often see in global economics, isn't it? There's clear short-term pain. Indian exporters, particularly in key sectors like textiles, pharmaceuticals, IT-enabled services, they face steep and immediate entry costs into the lucrative U.S. market.
Hits their bottom line immediately.
Right. This can significantly impact their current revenues, competitiveness, and maybe even lead to temporary job losses in those specific sectors back in India. However, there's also a potential for long-term gain.
How so?
As U.S. tariffs effectively make American goods more expensive globally, India and other emerging economies are presented with a strategic opportunity to capture market share elsewhere. They can position themselves as more competitive, more attractive alternatives for global trade. It kind of forces them to innovate and look beyond traditional markets.
Right, it acts as a catalyst for diversification. Zooming out, this strategic landscape could significantly accelerate India's ongoing pivot to other markets, actively reducing its reliance on the U.S.
And where are they pivoting to?
The sources give concrete examples. The EU, for instance, which is actively pushing forward trade negotiations with India, that could lead to new mutually beneficial free trade agreements, opening up a massive consumer market there.
Big potential.
Then there's ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. India seeks deeper economic integration there through diversified supply chains, lessening dependence on single markets and building regional resilience. And finally, Africa and Latin America. These are regions where India can strategically position itself as a viable alternative to China, maybe offering different trade and development models that are more palatable to local governments.
So it's not just about finding new customers.
No, it's about diversifying risk and building a more resilient, globally integrated economy for the long haul.
Which brings us back to the U.S. strategy. This tariff approach, while maybe intended for domestic protectionism, might ironically prove to be a self-destructive trade wall for America itself.
That's a strong claim from the sources.
It is. They present a strong assertion that the U.S.'s current tariff war, despite any perceived short-term political expediency or a boost to specific domestic lobbies, is fundamentally economically self-destructive. The core argument is that any revenue Washington collects through tariffs is largely lost in slower GDP growth across the broader economy.
Because the overall cost of goods rises and trade volumes decline.
Precisely. Furthermore, the source argues that tariffs actively discourage innovation by reducing access to cheaper or more advanced foreign inputs. They reduce overall productivity by forcing businesses to use less efficient domestic alternatives. And ultimately, they weaken the competitiveness of American industries on a global scale.
Meanwhile, in stark contrast, emerging powers, and they explicitly name a range from India to Brazil, are demonstrating remarkable adaptability. They're not just accepting the tariffs as a permanent barrier.
They're adjusting.
Actively. Diversifying their trade portfolios, strengthening alternative trade relationships, effectively finding new avenues for growth and commerce outside the U.S. economic orbit. This leads to an important question. What is the long-term result of this protectionist approach, according to the source?
The conclusion is quite stark. The tariff wall the U.S. is building around itself could become a wall of isolation.
Wow, that's a powerful and rather chilling image, isn't it?
It is. The profound implications of this could include potentially diminishing its global economic influence as other nations forge closer ties amongst themselves. It could erode its standing as a reliable and predictable trade partner. And ultimately, it could reshape the global economic landscape for decades to come, perhaps with the U.S. playing a smaller, less central role than it's accustomed to.
So with all these sweeping global shifts and trade frictions happening, what is India's ultimate strategic blueprint for navigating this complex future and asserting its place in the New World Order?
India's proactive approach, as summarized by our source, is not to see the tariff war purely as a loss, but rather as a catalyst for strategic repositioning. It outlined several key recommended actions for New Delhi.
Okay, what are they?
First, India needs to play the lobbying game in Washington more effectively, specifically by, as we mentioned, learning from Israel's playbook and successfully mobilizing bipartisan congressional support and influencing policy debates.
Use that diaspora connection.
Right. Second, it must diversify trade partnerships aggressively. thereby intentionally reducing its historical or perceived dependence on the U.S. market, expanding relationships with the EU, ASEAN, Africa, and Latin America. Third, it should use these tariffs as an opportunity to accelerate domestic reforms within India.
Turn the challenge inward.
Exactly. Aimed at improving productivity, enhancing competitiveness, and fostering the development of higher value-added exports that can compete globally regardless of tariffs. And finally, India needs to position itself as a stabilizing multipolar actor, demonstrating an agile ability to engage the U.S., China, Russia, and other powers simultaneously without being forced into rigid, exclusive alliances, securing its national interests through flexible diplomacy.
That is a truly sophisticated strategy for a rising power on the world stage. The overarching message seems to be that while the tariff war may cause short-term pain and immediate economic headwinds,
In the broader arc of history, it serves as a powerful underline to the undeniable reality of a multipolar world. In this new global order, the source argues, no single power can dictate terms anymore. Countries like India are increasingly compelled to master the art of strategic balance, to secure their national interests, ensure continued growth, and exert their influence on the global stage.
and this is precisely where India's large and influential diaspora becomes such a crucial tool for effective lobbying and shaping narratives in the U.S., directly drawing on that earlier point we discussed. They can act as a bridge rather than just a community living abroad.
Absolutely. Okay, we've discussed these large-scale economic and geopolitical forces at play. The specter of stagflation, the shifting global trade dynamics, India's strategic responses. Now, let's bring it down to a more human, yet equally impactful level. Let's look at one man's extraordinary and, yes, controversial story that perfectly encapsulates many of these overarching trends. The fascinating saga of Gautama Adani.
Gautama Adani, yeah, the enigmatic Indian billionaire. He truly embodies that quintessential rags to riches narrative that has both inspired and divided opinion, doesn't he? His story is such a microcosm of modern India's rise.
Tell us about his beginnings.
Born on June 24th, 1962, in Ahmedabad, Gujarat, he came from a middle-class Jain family of modest means. 8 children. His parents, Shantilal and Shantaban Adani, had migrated from Tharad, and his father worked as a textile merchant. Financial constraints were apparently a daily reality.
Not born into wealth, then.
Not at all. What makes his start particularly fascinating is its unconventional nature. Adani actually dropped out of Sheth Chimanlal Naginda's Vidyalaya school in 1978 at just 16. He explicitly chose to pursue work and business rather than academics, and he actively rejected his father's textile business, seeking immediate independence and wanting to forge his own path.
16 is young to make such a big decision.
It is. His pivotal first entrepreneurial foray at just 16 was moving to Mumbai, India's commercial capital, in 1978 and starting work as a diamond sorter for Mahendra Brothers.
A diamond sorter, that seems specific.
It does, but this seemingly small job, far from the world of textiles, provided him with his first exposure to high-value commerce. Crucially, it taught him negotiation, market timing, risk management skills that would prove absolutely foundational for his future empire.
Learning the ropes early.
Exactly. By the early 1980s, he had developed both a keen business sense and a valuable network of contacts. In his personal life, he married Preeti Vora, who is a dentist, in 1986. They have 2 sons, Kanan Adani, who now serves as CEO of Adani Ports and SEZ, and Jeet Adani, who leads Adani Airports and Adani Digital Labs, indicating it's very much a family-run enterprise now.
Any other family involved?
Yes, his brother, Vinod Adani, who later settled in Dubai, has also been deeply involved in the business, though often finds himself at the center of controversies over offshore entities and financial dealings. But the key point here is, unlike many Indian industrialists born into established, multi-generational empires, Adani's path was genuinely self-made from humble beginnings. He embodied the ethos of Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-reliant India, long before it became a national slogan.
That humble beginning as a diamond sorter quickly catapulted into the building of one of India's largest and most diversified conglomerates. A truly relentless expansion.
It really was. His entrepreneurial journey began in earnest in 1981 when he returned to Ahmedabad to help his brother Mahasukbhai run a plastics unit, initially focusing on polyvinyl chloride PVC imports.
Not too good,
Right. By 1985, he launched his own independent trading venture in polymers, strategically capitalizing on India's growing manufacturing demand for plastics. Then, in 1988, he founded Adani Exports, which is now the flagship Adani Enterprises. Initially, it traded agro products and power commodities. He was already thinking big, aiming to be a major player in vital sectors.
And then came liberalization.
Yes, here's where it gets truly interesting for India's economic history. India's sweeping economic liberalization under Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao in 1991, which dramatically dismantled the restrictive license Raj, that old system of extensive government control and licensing that had previously stifled economic growth and private enterprise, proved to be fortuitous timing for Adani.
Right place, right time.
Absolutely. This period of deregulation allowed him to scale aggressively, leveraging newfound economic freedoms. He quickly became one of the country's leading foreign exchange earners by the late 1990s. But the defining pivot, the moment that truly set the stage for his empire, came in 1995. Adani won the bid from the Gujarat government to manage Mundra Port.
Mundra Port. That's huge now, doesn't it?
Massive. He developed it from a modest setup into India's largest private port, a true marvel of modern logistics and a flagship asset of the group's sprawling infrastructure empire. This foresight in infrastructure was absolutely key to his later success.
And the expansion just continued relentlessly.
Yeah.
Almost breathtaking in scope.
It did. In 1996, he founded Adani Power, which would eventually become India's largest private thermal power producer, supplying vast amounts of electricity to the rapidly growing nation. From 1999 to 2008, he shrewdly entered the coal trading business and acquired international mines, including the Bunyu mine in Indonesia, securing vital raw materials for his power plants.
Vertical integration starting early.
Absolutely. Then, from 2010 to 2012, he acquired the highly controversial Carmichael coal mine in Australia. That move sparked significant global protests and the Stop Adani campaign, making his name synonymous with environmental controversy on a global scale.
That really put him on the map internationally, maybe not always in a good way.
True. Throughout the 2000s and 2010s, he continued to diversify relentlessly, launched Adani Wilmar, focused on edible oils for India's massive consumer market, Adani Gas, and systematically expanded across various critical infrastructure sectors: energy, ports, logistics, mining, and eventually airports.
And then things really accelerated recently.
The period from 2020 to 2022 is one of truly intense activity and audacious mega acquisitions. It signaled a significant push into not just traditional infrastructure, but also, importantly, renewable energy. This included winning the world's largest solar energy bid, valued at an astonishing $6 billion, showcasing his pivot towards green energy.
A major shift.
Huge. He also acquired a 74% stake in Mumbai International Airport, a major strategic asset. In a massive play, he purchased Ambuja Cement and an ACC for a staggering $10.5 billion, instantly making him a dominant player in the construction materials sector. And in a surprising move, he took a controlling stake in the media company NDTV, expanding into media influence.
Cement and media, quite the diversification.
Right. By 2022, this rapid growth propelled Adani to briefly become Asia's richest man, surpassing fellow Indian billionaire Mukesh Ambani. His net worth is estimated at around $60 billion as of August 2025, placing him among the world's 25th wealthiest individuals. A testament to his ambition and, frankly, his risk-taking.
So what does this all mean for his distinctive strategy? How did he achieve this?
Adani's growth strategy centered intensely on vertical integration, controlling entire supply chains from mining operations to port logistics, energy generation, and distribution. Our sources consistently point to his reliance on both significant debt, a lot of borrowing, and his perceived proximity to government contracts as key drivers that enabled this aggressive, rapid expansion. But, as you'd expect, such relentless, debt-fueled expansion, particularly when perceived as having close government ties, almost inevitably draws significant scrutiny and controversy, especially in a country like India, where political connections are always under a microscope.
Which leads to the public perception issue.
Exactly. What's particularly fascinating is the deeply polarized public perception of Adani. He simultaneously inspires both widespread admiration and suspicion. His ardent supporters hail him as a visionary who has genuinely modernized India's infrastructure, created millions of jobs across various sectors, and strategically align his ambitious projects with crucial national priorities, like renewable energy development and critical logistics.
He gets awards, recognition.
Significant recognition, including being named in Time's 100 Most Influential People in 2022, and his Adani Foundation, led by his wife Preeti, runs substantial philanthropic programs in education, healthcare, and rural development, showcasing a public-facing commitment to social good.
Yet his critics fiercely accuse him of crony capitalism. consistently pointing to his perceived proximity to Prime Minister Narendra Modi and suggesting he leverages political connections for business advantage.
That's the core criticism. The sources detail specific categories of allegations that have marred his record and fueled ongoing controversy. Multiple environmental violations, citing examples like the Mundra port expansion and that fiercely contested Carmichael mine in Australia, accusations of stock manipulation to inflate share prices, and a history of facing multiple legal probes both domestically and internationally.
Have any of these stuck?
It's a nuanced outcome. Some of these probes have apparently been dismissed or cleared, while others remain ongoing. This contributes to the persistent cloud of controversy surrounding his business practices and adds complexity to his public image. It's not black and white.
And this internal scrutiny intensified dramatically, gaining unprecedented global attention with a series of powerful and unexpected attacks originating from financial entities in the United States.
Right. This is where the story takes a truly dramatic international turn. Adani's biggest and most damaging reputational crises originated not from Indian regulators or internal probes, but unexpectedly from the United States.
Starting with Hindenburg.
Exactly. In January 2023, the U.S. short-selling firm Hindenburg Research published an explosive report accusing the Adani Group of perpetrating the largest con in corporate history. Very strong language.
Incredibly strong.
This damning report triggered a massive and immediate $150 billion stock crash in the group's market capitalization, wiping out a significant portion of his wealth literally overnight. And it's crucial to note, Hindenburg openly disclosed its short positions,
Meaning they profited from the crash they caused.
indicating a clear profit motive derived directly from the subsequent stock decline.
Okay, that was huge. But it didn't end there.
As if that wasn't enough, 2024 brought an even more significant international development. The U.S. Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission formally charged Adani executives with bribery, securities fraud, and wire fraud.
Federal charges from the U.S. government.
Incredibly serious charges, specifically alleging $250 million in bribes related to solar contracts. What's particularly telling here, according to the source, is the observation that Indian authorities were slow to act on these charges, or at least appeared to be. This further fueled suspicions of political shielding and a lack of independent oversight within India, adding another layer of complexity to the whole saga.
So this saga has transformed into this complex, often politically charged debate. Was this a legitimate shakedown, a racially motivated attack, or perhaps some blend of both?
That's the crux of the debate now. The shakedown theory suggests that short sellers like Hindenburg engage in predatory tactics. They conduct extensive research, release a damning report, and then profit directly from the market crashes they help trigger. This leads some to characterize their actions as a calculated financial hit job, designed to manipulate markets for personal gain under the guise of exposing wrongdoing.
Okay, that's one side. What's the other?
On the other hand, Adani's staunch defenders present the racism theory. They claim that certain Western firms harbor underlying resentment towards India's rapid economic rise on the global stage and unfairly target brown-skinned billionaires who dare to challenge established Western dominance. The aggressive tone and perceived one-sidedness of the Hindenburg report are often cited as feeding these perceptions of inherent bias, suggesting maybe a double standard is applied to non-Western entrepreneurs.
So where does the source land on this? Shakedown or racism?
Zooming out, the truth, as per the source, is likely mixed. While U.S. prosecutors did bring evidence-based charges against Adani executives, indicating genuine legal concerns, the profit-driven nature of short-selling and perhaps a selective focus on Adani do add some weight to the shakedown claims.
So elements of both might be true.
Possibly. This dual framing has transformed the Adani saga into a complex case study in global finance, geopolitics, and identity politics, highlighting the intricate interplay of economic interests, national pride, regulatory oversight, and cultural perceptions on the world stage. It's far more than just a business story now.
So after enduring all these significant storms and intense international scrutiny, what does Gautam Adani's legacy truly look like today? And what does his extraordinary, often controversial story tell us about the broader narrative of modern India's rise?
Gautam Adani's journey, as portrayed by the source, is really both things. It's a quintessential story of India's liberalization boom, how opening up the economy unleashed incredible entrepreneurial energy, and it's also a compelling parable about the risks of concentrated power.
Ambition and risk.
Exactly. His vast empire undoubtedly symbolizes immense ambition, innovation, and a can-do spirit that has genuinely transformed India's infrastructure. Yet, It is equally illustrative of the inherent pitfalls of debt-fueled growth and deep political entanglement within a rapidly developing economy where regulatory lines can sometimes appear blurred.
And where does he stand now?
As of 2025, Adani continues to expand his sprawling business ventures, demonstrating remarkable resilience. But his legacy, due to all these ongoing controversies, undeniably hangs in the balance.
And this brings us back to that persistently polarized view we talked about.
Precisely. To his ardent supporters, he is unequivocally a nation builder who has fundamentally transformed India's infrastructure, creating jobs and essential assets. To his vocal critics, he remains an emblem of crony capitalism and unchecked power, benefiting disproportionately from political connections.
So what's the final verdict from the source?
The source suggests that in truth he is likely both ambitious, resilient, flawed. This raises a critical question. What does this complex figure tell us about India itself?
That his story is maybe India's story.
In a way, yes. Adani's story, with all its complexities and contradictions, is ultimately emblematic of the complex, contentious, unbreakable rise of modern India itself.
Unpack that a little. How does his story reflect India's?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, his personal ongoing challenges and his remarkable resilience seem to reflect India's broader journey on the global stage. India is navigating intense international scrutiny, it's asserting its growing economic power, and it's striving constantly to balance domestic interests with global expectations for transparency and fair play. His story is a powerful microcosm of India's larger narrative of ambition, rapid growth, and the inevitable challenges economic, political, ethical that come with a rising global profile. Challenges that every major rising power eventually faces.
Okay. From the specific, deeply human story of a powerful billionaire to the grand sweep of global economics and shifting geopolitical alliances, let's try and tie all these intricate threads together with a final thought for you, our listener.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have. We've delved into the unsettling return of stagflation as a very real economic risk in the U.S., driven by those dual shocks of protectionist tariffs and mass labor deportations. Then we pivoted to India's evolving and remarkably strategic approach to trade and global alliances in this newly multipolar world, highlighting how it's adeptly using U.S. trade tensions as an unexpected opportunity for its own economic diversification.
Turning challenge into opportunity.
Right. And finally, we connected these large-scale forces to the fascinating and controversial saga of Gautam Adani, presenting it as a vivid microcosm that illustrates the complexities of rapid economic rise, the often blurred lines between business and politics, and the intensifying international scrutiny now faced by emerging global players.
And these aren't merely abstract academic concepts or distant headlines you just skim past in the newsfeed. These are deeply interconnected global dynamics that directly impact your world.
How so?
From the prices you pay for everyday goods to the profound shifts in international power and influence. Our goal for this deep dive was really to provide you with a crucial shortcut to being truly well-informed on these critical, often overlooked topics, helping you navigate the news with a sharper, more critical eye.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, consider this provocative thought. In an increasingly multipolar world, marked by these daring economic gambles, the resurgence of nationalistic trade policies, and these high-stakes corporate sagas playing out on the global stage, how much of a nation's economic fate is truly in its own hands?
That's a deep question.
And how much is shaped by the complex, often unseen, and relentlessly interconnected forces of global finance, trade, and geopolitical power? What does the dramatic rise of figures like Gautam Adani and the intense international challenges they face ultimately tell us about the future of global capitalism and about the evolving balance between national interest and international scrutiny?
Are we witnessing a new era of economic sovereignty, perhaps, or is it simply new, more complex forms of interdependence and friction playing out?
Something to truly ponder beyond today's headlines.